two elements, a wealthy, privileged sector and a superfluous sector of people who are useless for wealth production and profit production, which is, of course, the only value, the only human value, people having no human value in themselves apart from this under dominant ideologies. And the agreement is likely to drive all three countries into a low-wage, low-growth equilibrium in which the population will suffer but profits will increase. Actually, that's a very broadly held conclusion. It was the conclusion, for example, of the Congressional Office of Technology Assessment in an analysis of this version of NAFTA about a year ago, and I think it's quite a reasonable analysis and indeed rather widely held. There's a still more important aspect to this version of NAFTA, which kind of explains, I think, the hysteria about it. It's a tremendous attack against democracy, and that's also recognized. You read over and over again that the point of NAFTA is to lock Mexico in to the current reforms, as they are called. That is, the policies of opening up the economy, which have brought about the Mexican economic miracle, in which, incidentally, wages have dropped about 60% over the past decade, and the share of labor in income has dropped from about 36% to 23%. That's a typical reaction, a consequence of structural adjustment, economic liberalization, and so on. And it's necessary to lock that in for Mexico for reasons which, in fact, were described in a high-level Latin American strategy conference in Washington a couple of years ago, which discussed the special relationship between the United States and Mexico and found it extraordinarily positive, completely untroubled by endemic torture and murder of union leaders and the great decline in real wages, starvation, and so on. So the relationship was fine, but there was a cloud on the horizon, and that was this. A democracy opening in Mexico could test the special relationship by bringing into office a government more interested in challenging the United States on economic and nationalist grounds. In other words, you can't be sure that there might not be a democracy opening in Mexico. And if you have a democracy opening, maybe the rabble will start to express their views and interests, and they may challenge this nice arrangement, and then we'd really be in trouble. So therefore, you better lock it in with agreements of roughly the status of a treaty, which are going to be hard to break out of. And so the same comment holds of the United States and Canada. There have been great achievements by corporate power, increasingly transnational power, in beating down wages and benefits and welfare and converting the state to a kind of a welfare system for the rich even more than before. And it's very important to lock all that stuff in case there might be a democracy opening here too someday. And the fear over such a democracy opening is exactly what inspired all of this hysteria about the labor movement daring to petition its representatives and so on. Well, that's, I should say that this is all built into the mechanisms of these international agreements. And it's not something to speculate about. There are perfectly clear examples already. So take, say, the Canadian-U.S. aspect of it, which already illustrates what's coming and why corporate power and privilege is so committed to this. Here's one example of the kind of thing we might look forward to. There are many. The province of Ontario, there is a so-called free trade agreement between Canada and the United States. The province of Ontario, in Ontario, legislation was proposed to institute a no-fault, publicly funded insurance plan for auto insurance. That would be much cheaper and much more efficient than the current privately supported plan. The situation is analogous to the health system. It would be a system like the health system. You cut back a ton of bureaucracy and administrative costs. It becomes more efficient, and it's also tax-based rather than individually funded, so it's not so regressive and so on. Well, that didn't get very far. It was challenged by U.S. insurance companies who claimed that it was an illegal interference with free trade because it undercut their abilities to operate profitably in Canada. Well, the province of Ontario could have proceeded with litigation on this matter, but they dropped it. It would have been much too expensive, and the insurance companies have the money and the time and the fancy lawyers and so on. The public doesn't. So Ontario dropped it. If it had gone through the procedures specified by the Free Trade Agreement, it would have worked its way up to an adjudication panel which operates in secret and is made up of corporate lawyers and trade representatives, and you can have a fair guess what the outcome of that will be. And that's typical. The point is to take away power from popular organizations, even parliamentary organizations, which are somewhat responsive to the public, remove power from them, transfer it to the corporations themselves and their representatives, which a corporation, in particular a transnational corporation, is basically a totalitarian system. Huge, incidentally. Many of them are bigger than most states. It's totalitarian in the sense that the decision-making is completely top-down and no influence from the outside. If it's transnational, even the limited influence that comes from national legislation is restricted. If power can be transferred into their hands, we have an attack on democracy which is really efficient. It means that major decisions affecting our lives will be made in secret by completely unaccountable structures, huge in scale, like they dominate about maybe 40% or so of world trade, so-called. It's 50% of U.S. exports to Mexico don't even enter the Mexican market. They happen to cross the border, but they're from one branch of a U.S. corporation to another, and then they come right back again. That's trade, only a kind of joke. It's not trade at all. It's centrally managed interchanges, radically violating market conditions, of course, because the corporations don't pay attention to that in their internal transactions. So these are huge outfits, unaccountable, absolutist in character. If power can be transmitted into their hands, then the residues of the democratic system become more and more meaningless. And that's very important. As I mentioned, the idea of popular democracy, of the mob and the rabble getting involved in public affairs, has always been anathema to privileged sectors. And here we have new opportunities for putting an end to this heresy forever while maintaining formal procedures. Like you go every once in a while to, push a lever here and there. Well, you can see that it really is a matter of great significance, not so much because of job loss or gain, nobody knows anything about that, but because of the contribution to polarization and the destructive effects on popular democracy. Those are serious matters, hence the enormous hysteria. I might say that the next major achievement of the Clinton administration, the one which we could have talked about if this talk was a little later,